how women in ancient Rome were treated by their husbands, their families, and their societies. What laws and customs governed their lives and limited their choices? Ancient Rome was one of the most powerful and influential civilizations in history, but it was also one of the most patriarchal and misogynistic as well. Women in ancient Rome had no legal rights or independence of their own. They were considered to be the property and possessions of their fathers or husbands who had the power to control, discipline, and even kill them. Women in ancient Rome were married at a very young age, usually between 12 and 15 years old. They had no say in choosing their husbands, who were often much older than them. Their marriages were arranged by their fathers or guardians who had the legal authority to give them away or take them back. The main purpose of marriage in ancient Rome was to produce legitimate children, especially sons, who could inherit the family name and property. Women were expected to be faithful, obedient, and submissive to their husbands, who had the power to divorce or punish them for any reason. The wedding ceremony in ancient Rome was not only a sacred ritual, but also a legal contract between the bride and the groom or their fathers. To end the ceremony, the couple would together offer a sacrifice, usually a pig, and 10 witnesses would sign the wedding contract. The final formal act of the ceremony was the couple breaking bread together. This was a symbolic gesture of sharing their lives and becoming one flesh. The bride's attire was very important for the wedding ceremony as it reflected her purity, fertility, and status. The bride wore a long white dress with a veil and a wreath of flowers on her head. It was believed that the veil would protect the bride from evil spirits and bad omens. The bride was escorted by her father or guardian to the house of her husband, where she was greeted by him and his relatives. The groom would give her a ring as a sign of his commitment and affection. The bride then crossed the threshold of her new home, where she offered a sacrifice to the household gods. She also changed her hairstyle and clothes to signify her new status as a married woman. The wedding night in ancient Rome was also a significant event, as it marked the consummation of the marriage and the loss of the bride's virginity. The bride was expected to be a virgin before marriage, and this was a sign of her purity and honor. If she wasn't a virgin, she could be accused of adultery or incest and face severe consequences. The husband had the right to inspect his wife's genitals and bloodstains on the bedsheets and report any irregularities to his family or the authorities. Women were treated by their husbands as their property and possessions. Their value was mainly as wives and mothers. They were citizens, but they couldn't vote or hold political office. They had no legal rights or independence of their own. By law, Roman girls and women were almost always under the jurisdiction of a male, whether a father, a husband, or a guardian. Throughout her life, a woman might pass from the control of one male to another. They had to obey their husbands in everything, from household matters to personal affairs. They had to bear as many children as possible, preferably sons, and take care of them and their husbands. They had to manage the household budget, supervise the slaves, and perform various domestic duties. They also had to maintain their modesty, fidelity, and chastity, as these were virtues expected of a Roman matron. If they failed to do so, they could face severe consequences, such as divorce, exile, or even death. Women had limited opportunities for education and social interaction. Only a few women from wealthy and powerful families could access formal education or learn to read and write. Most women learned basic skills such as spinning, weaving, cooking, and sewing from their mothers or female slaves. They were not allowed to participate in public events such as games, theater, or politics. They could only attend religious ceremonies or festivals with their husbands' permission. Women also faced many health risks and dangers. They had a high mortality rate due to childbirth complications, infections, diseases, or violence. They had no access to contraception or abortion, and they had to rely on herbal remedies or superstitions for their health issues. They also had to endure the harsh conditions of slavery, war, poverty, or oppression if they weren't freeborn or protected by a male relative. Women in ancient Rome were also subjected to physical and sexual abuse by their husbands. They had no control over their own bodies or sexuality. They had to satisfy their husbands' sexual demands regardless of their own feelings or preferences. They had to endure their husbands' infidelity, violence, and jealousy. They had no recourse or protection from their husbands' actions, as they were considered to be under their authority and jurisdiction. They had few opportunities to interact with other people outside of their households, especially men. They had to wear modest and plain clothes that covered most of their bodies. They had to wear veils or masks when they went out in public as a sign of their modesty and respectability. Women were treated by their families as secondary and inferior members. They had no influence or authority over their own lives or destinies. They had to follow the decisions and wishes of their fathers or guardians before marriage and their husbands after marriage. They were also subjected to the power of the paterfamilias, the male head of the household who had the legal right to control, discipline, or even kill his wife, children, and slaves. The paterfamilias could arrange or dissolve marriages, disown or adopt children, and dispose of property as he pleased. He could also expose unwanted infants, especially girls, to die or to be sold into slavery. Women were also dependent on their families for their economic and social status. They had no property or inheritance rights of their own. They couldn't own land, make contracts, or sue or be sued in court. They could only inherit a small portion of their father's or husband's estate, and only if they had no brothers or sons. They could also lose their inheritance if they remarried or committed adultery. Women were treated by their society as marginal and subordinate citizens. They had no political or legal rights or representation. They couldn't vote, hold office, or serve in the army. They couldn't participate in public debates, trials, or ceremonies. They couldn't speak in public or write books or letters without their husbands' permission. They were also discriminated against by their society based on their class and status. There were three main classes of women in ancient Rome: the matron, the freedwomen, and the slaves. The matrons were the wives of upper-class men who enjoyed some privileges and respectability, but still had to obey their husbands and fathers. The freedwomen were the former slaves who had been manumitted by their masters, who had some rights and freedoms, but still faced social stigma and prejudice. The slaves were the lowest class of women who had no rights or dignity at all. They were treated as property and objects by their owners, who could abuse them, sell them, or even kill them at will. Women were also oppressed by their society based on their gender and sexuality. They were seen as inferior and weak by nature and as sources of temptation and sin by morality. They were expected to be modest, chaste, and loyal to their husbands and to avoid contact with other men. They were also expected to be fertile, maternal, and nurturing to their children and to avoid any form of contraception or abortion. They were also expected to be silent, obedient, and submissive to their husbands, fathers, and masters. In conclusion, women in ancient Rome had a marginal and oppressed role in society as they were dependent on the men in their lives. They had no legal rights or independence of their own. They were treated as property and possessions by their husbands rather than as dignified and respected partners. Thank you all for watching this video, and don't forget to leave a comment down below and let us know what you thought about this topic. See you next time, and bye for now.